Perfect. Okay. Good evening, gentlemen. This
Good
is
evening.
our second session on Dialogue on Vervaeke. It's a series on AFMC is what I'm calling, like awakening from the
That's right. The
too much of a mouthful. And so,
abbreviation, right?
and today we will discuss the episode number 3 and 4.
Yep.
And, that's kind of the topic. And as always, I'm not going to repeat the comments I made last time. This is not meant to be a definitive discourse on every topic he has covered in those, nor is it meant to be a full tutorial. This is meant to be a conversation among four curious people who are learning to learn, who are seeking to learn about the ideas, and in doing so, hopefully improve each other's understanding. That's kind of the intention here. So with that, I will cede the floor. And who wants to kick off today?
Let's see. Maybe I'll say yes to that. So, do we want to introduce any sort of structure at all, or are we just kind of giving our?
So last time, the organic structure, and we could be more formal, is that let's take episode 3, for example, and we can start by saying what struck you, what couple of insights you had, and any observations you want to make on that. And then we'll take it from there. We can react to it, or we
Okay.
Battery 70%. Connected to.
That
Yes.
is.
BK3.
What was that from?
That's
Anyway.
my Bluetooth speaker kicked off when I would turn my
Oh,
computer
I
on.
see. Yeah, I mean, episode 3, I thought was full of all kinds of, both of these episodes, but I thought that I don't remember ever learning about the Axel Revolution, and so that I'm really grateful to learn that. I mean, it's like not a small thing actually. But the other thing that really hit me was that, because I kept, I took notes, and I summarized and all that, but I was thinking when I was listening to it, re-listening to the program, I realized that the psychotechnologies include a conception of time, where before time was a cyclical, and it didn't progress. It was just a repeat, including your own responses and your own way of being. And I didn't realize that time conception could be considered a psychotechnology. And that made me realize that I really need to look up what that is, or maybe ponder what that means, because I think that it's very profound to think that people before the Axel Revolution actually thought about time totally different than we do now, including many, many other things. I mean, he keeps saying this. He goes, I think this is in episode 4, but he's saying, everything we think is influenced heavily by Bible philosophy and wisdom, right? So you don't have to, he goes, I don't give a shit if you believe in the Bible or not, or God or anything else. This is how we think, whether you like it or not. This is how we're, even the way we perceive improvement is from this time, which is, it's a long time ago. I'm like, this is amazing. So, the concept of progress, of self-improvement over time, deeply rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition, shapes modern understanding of personal growth. That's one of my notes. So anyway.
Anyone wants to react to that? Because I think
anyway, that's a good start for me.
Let me build on that, and I'll love to hear from Cam and Vish.
Yeah.
My take was Axel Revolution, and he talks about Buddha explicitly and tradition as the kind of two major forks, way before the Judeo-Christian traditions came about in time. And what's interesting is that the Hindu view, which I'm slightly familiar with, Hindu view was and still was like cycles of time. And this idea of history and recording history is very much a Western tradition, because you record history so that you can see the progress over time. Whereas there was the oral traditions, at least of the Upanishads and others, were not recorded for sake of recording history as a time. They were recorded mostly to kind of perpetuate one generation from another, passing on the knowledge. So it's very interesting that the cycle of time concept is still very much part of Hinduism.
Is it? Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
it's
I
the
don't know very
foundation
little
of
about it. So
yeah, and even Buddhist view, to be clear, does not talk about arrow of time, right? In that regard, Buddhist is not the same as Buddhist talks about escaping from the trap of the cycle of time.
right. He mentions that
Which
actually.
is not the
doesn't- yeah.
same as, you know,
Yeah.
progress will happen over generations kind of view.
I also thought it was funny that he said that we think that reincarnation is a great thing, but in the ancient Eastern traditions, it actually means you're not getting on with it. Like
Yes.
it's a punishment,
Right.
basically.
Right.
Hilarious.
So, I know that's interesting. I had a slightly different viewpoint, although with some of the same data points that you brought up.
Go ahead.
Because, well, I guess it's not a point as much as it's maybe a confusion on my end, which is even when I came across like the episode for the first time, like it didn't seem like mutually exclusive things to me to see time as cyclical and to see time as moving forward.
I agree.
Maybe partly to me, my understanding of how some of the Eastern philosophies view like the cyclical passage of time is that it's always moving forward. It's just that patterns are constantly repeating themselves. I mean, to take Anurag's example, right? Like in the Hindu philosophy, there's this concept of like a sequence of ages that come and go, and they always follow. And we are in, I guess, the third age according to that. But it never, at least my understanding of it, isn't that we were doomed to repeat the exact same thing again. Is it would always move forward, but the same patterns would crop up again.
Okay,
and
that's
so
good distinction.
But let me build on that. That is being contested. That is what he calls circular view of the world. Even if you say, you know, in Hindu philosophy, today's Kali Yuga, and once this epoch finishes, we will go back and repeat the pattern, even if the pattern is different. It is still the cycle view of time, but which is in contrast to a progress view of time, which is where the Greeks and eventually the Western civilization says that generations will improve with accumulation of knowledge.
Who's contesting
and
it?
we might go up and down, but we are not, we have a trajectory and agency to move forward as progress, whereas that notion is just not there, either in Buddhism or in Hinduism, to my knowledge.
is part of what that kind of progress means to you sort of this implicit assumption that it's really unknown where we steer ourselves.
Exactly, the open world, which is the point. It's not like
That's what he says. The open
progress
future.
as in definitely things are going to improve, kind of Pollyannish view. In fact, the
Right,
view
right.
that the future is open and we have agency as humans to negotiate with the gods and negotiate with the world in an open future that we can control and have agency, versus a circular future where, you know, however hard we might try, the best we can do is escape the cycle.
Is it? So I like what Vish said at the outset, where it was they're not mutually exclusive. They don't seem like they're mutually exclusive. So when you say it's contested, are you saying that Vervaeke is the one contesting that, or?
I'm saying the idea of axial revolution actually says that this difference is quite important. That's all. Like, right? It is obviously you can mash up these two ideas, but what he's saying is that with Judeo-Christian biblical view, both of the Jews coming out and saying there's a God we can negotiate with and we can create a new, open, forward-looking world, and we have control over it. Same with the Christian view, whereas the Eastern views are not open in that regard, because the cycle closes over time, regardless of what we do, right?
So
the pattern repeats, whereas there is no pattern in the axial view of the world. So
maybe a question then for some of you.
Big difference in how the meaning was created. That's all. The meaning is created.
Difference in how the meaning is created.
By
Interesting.
trying to say you will escape the cycle of life and death. And same with Buddhism, by saying you will reach nirvana. Whereas meaning is created in the Western tradition, including the Greeks, by this idea that you can forever get out of the perception problems. You can always get out of the cave and see what's out there. That idea of progress and you piercing the veil of ignorance and looking at the upper world, the two worldview, the 2-3 worldview has always been there, like the gods and the underworld. That idea has been there, but this idea that it's an open-ended world, that is foundationally different, is how I took it away.
Yeah, Vishi, what you were going to add to that?
Well, yeah, I had a question. I'm not super, well versed in generally Abrahamic religion, but isn't there this concept of like the end of days across all of them, where it's sort of this prophesized time when Lucifer comes back in the Bible, and there's sort of equivalents in Judaism and sort of Islam as well?
I don't know it well enough. I wasn't raised in those traditions, so I'm not sure. That's a good question, but I'm not sure if that's actually universally accepted or if that's just certain people with certain views. But I don't have no idea.
That's
I mean,
a question.
I haven't heard like people like Peterson, who brings up the Bible a lot. I've never heard him mention that ever. So I'm just expecting that may be a fringe interpretation. That's my intuition about it, but I don't know. I mean, I'm making that up. I don't know if I'm right, but that's my guess.
Yeah, it's possible. My viewpoint is at least partly informed by movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger in them.
Well, those are always the truth. So why would you question that? The Terminator,
but no.
right?
So, well, and I think the movie itself is called End of Days. There's one where he's.
Oh yeah. Yes, I think you're right. Huh, forgot about that one. But yeah, it's probably biblically influenced, but who knows? I mean, Hollywood is a great way of.
We come back to the psychotechnology of how you said it well, I think at the beginning, Michael, about it's something about the conceptualization of time as a psychotechnology.
That's right.
I couldn't quite tell whether it was you whether you were saying it was that you had to go look up to understand,
I was
whether
going.
It was the axial revolution itself.
No, axial revolution is what I wanted to look up, as well as the word psychotechnologies in itself, because I'd never heard that word before.
So he uses it ad nauseum. So
he does.
That would be helpful. It would be helpful for me anyway to parse that term a little bit, like what amongst ourselves, like what does that really mean to the four of us? What is when somebody says psychotechnology, to me, as someone who actually works in technology and modern technology, that seems like a bit of a misnomer. So how do you guys hear that? What does it mean to you, the term psychotechnology? Because I don't think I'd ever heard it before I heard it start into Vervaeke.
I think it would be best to look it up in like Webster. So
Vish, do you have a definition? I have an understanding of it, but I want to see if somebody else does.
Well, yeah, me too. I want to know how you guys understand it. I understand the term because to me it's a critical term.
Yeah. So I looked at it quite simply, again, as a technologist myself, that there are certain tools that allow us to extend our cognition, just like we have a hammer or a tool that will allow us to do things that we can't do without a tool, except that it is a cognitive tool that allows us to do things that we could not do before.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses very classic examples like writing, counting, right?
Math,
so
writing,
it's not like cognitively humans were just as intelligent IQ-wise before writing was invented. It's just that once invented, writing allowed us to like store our ideas and come back and reflect on those ideas and course correct those ideas, which in a non-literate society, we would not were not able to do that, right? We would have to go by memory of what we said rather than record of what we said. Mm-hmm. So he's using those as literally the technology. So by that definition, printing press would be a psychotechnology, as would be, in fact, the Zoom technology we are right now is a psychotechnology, because we are having conversations as we would be having around a fire. We are recording it. And if one of us chooses to come back and look at the recording, we have a version of that live conversation available to us. Whereas 200 years ago, that simply wasn't the case, right? Or even 20 years ago.
Well,
That's
no, not right. I'm going to be a little bit pedantic here because I think that it's technology is a noun. What you were describing, the writing, that's a behavior. So to go psycho, that's psychology, and then technology, that's an object within the process of cognition. So that's why there's a misnomer there, and I can let it go. I just really want
no, I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way at all.
By doing that right there, he's big on grammar and how you're speaking. What are you talking about? You're already characterizing yourself as a machine.
So I don't see it that way. Let me push back and see whether we're on the same page.
Okay.
It's not a machine metaphor. It is simply the metaphor that human cognition can be extended through tools. And the tools doesn't have to be quote unquote, you can call it a machine, you can call it a stick to pry open something, you can call it. And the point simply being that over time, because of our capability, we create tools that allow us to do things, and we interact with the tools, and those tools help us extend our cognition. That's why psycho as in psyche, not so like psychology and a cognition. So he's saying these are cognitive tools. That's how I see it. These are
okay. So again, okay. So if we're
cognitive tools that we engage with, and it helps us improve our cognitive capabilities, individually and collectively.
Reach or effectiveness, I would think would be another way to put it.
Both individually and collectively.
So Cam, can you explain again where you see the disconnect?
Yeah, that would be.
Well, it isn't necessarily a disconnect. It's just I'm deeply uneasy with the use of the term because it's a conflation of a psychology with a tool. So a tool I can understand, like I've built houses with my own hands. Like I understand tool in a very particular way from those experiences. And when you conflate psychology with technology, in my mind, like it slips so quickly into this sense that it's me doing it. It's me making the tool. I don't think that's the case. I think that the cognition evolves as a consequence of the rest of creation. It's not something that I'm inventing and creating. It's not my work. The cognitive process is a consequence of the rest of creation. So I don't want to belabor the point. I just really want, I'm deeply uneasy with the idea that I'm creating my own cognitive tools.
I can see your point. And I think maybe the reality is that it's kind of a spectrum, because
it's kind of a what?
A spectrum.
I actually think there's a profound disconnect here, and I'll put it out there. Later on, anticipating some of the conversations later on, Vervaeke makes a big deal. In fact, one of his foundational arguments, foreshadowing it, is that the reality is neither objective or not subjective, it's transjective. Meaning,
thank you.
By interacting with reality, we change it for ourselves and we get changed, both.
Yeah, that's the co-creative nature
of
reality.
That idea is foundational, and that is why when we come across objects that we can convert into tools, those tools affect us, and then we in turn affect the tool, and that cycle continues, right? Yep. So that is why it is an important concept, because it is not like we are a sealed chamber of cognition and tools exist outside of us. We and the tools co-create each other, and some tools allow us, like scaffolding, to go up the rungs, which we wouldn't be able to do without the scaffolding. And that's kind of the metaphor I see. And that's why psychotechnology to me makes perfect sense. Without the label I can give you completely, Cam, could be very confusing. If you remove the label and replace it by how do you explain the power of reading, the written word? How do you explain the power of a calculator, right? The only way to explain that would be not that those objects existed, like those were created incrementally by us, and at every step that allowed us to do something more with our cognition that we individually or collectively could do prior to the evolution of that tool.
So when you say us, who are you referring to?
I'm talking about all the individuals and collective that engaged in the social process and individual invention process of evolving that tool, as an example. Because if you look at how history of numbers originated through merchants who had to keep track of the goods that were being traded on Silk Road, right? So the idea of numbers came about that way. It was a psychotechnology that evolved because of the human necessity, and incrementally over generations, by trial and error and experimentation, they settled on the best set of numbers that could get the biggest bang for the buck for the computations. And hence the Hindu zero and all that other stuff that came together. I'm using that as a microcosm of an example of how numbers became a psychotechnology, and how now we just take it as a given that everybody would know numbers and can count and keep tabs. But it wasn't the case 2,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago.
So do you think it's fair to say that the uneasiness, the intuitive sense, I'll say, that I feel about the use of that particular tool then is there's an instinctual drive to modify that particular tool?
So I agree with your instinctive caution, because we live in a world where the tools can shape us even more so before we can shape the tools. So in that sense, I think your fear is not unfounded, especially in the world of AI, and especially you are a technologist, so am I, so are many of the other people here. So we can all see us becoming hostage to tools, but the nature is that we are creatures that create tools.
Yeah. Cam, tell me if this split makes more sense to you. I think there's two aspects of tools that we're trying to talk about. One is, and I think this is the way Vervaeke is using it, at least in this episode, is it's just a force multiplier.
Yep.
Right? And when he says psychotechnology, he just means a non-physical force multiplier. I think,
or a reframing tool, which I guess is a force multiplier, but that's the other main thing, is it's reframe. So you write something down, you can see where you error.
Exactly, right? It helps you sort of save your knowledge and come back to it and build upon it. But then, Cam, I think the point you were making is, what is the relationship of the tool to the person that makes the tool, right? And I think you were seeing a difference between the relationship between us and the physical tools that we create versus us and the psychotechnologies that sort of co-evolve culturally or sort of in response to the environmental conditions that we're in. And maybe somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, you could arguably take something like fire and say, well, how did we invent fire as a tool? Right? We probably saw it around us, then tried to replicate it. Yeah. And so there's a sort of a spectrum there of like how much we borrowed or got inspiration as a result of who we are and where we were in order to solve the problems that were in front of us. So if you could construct a causal chain to argue that most tools are sort of, to use Anu's language, co-evolve with us.
In fact, that's the definition of tool.
What is?
An object that can be used for attaining ends we can't meet right now. The working, like literal conceptual definition of a tool would be exactly that, an implement for extending our capacities, right? Whatever, cognitive, physical, etc. Even the spear throwing, etc., is all tools, command on nature to create tools that help us. But if I may, I was going back to a point that Vish made, if I may. Is that okay, Cam?
Yeah, I think I've beat that one to death. Thanks for letting me.
I was going through my notes over here. I want to come back to this idea of Axel and the idea of a trajectory, open-ended future. And because he explains in lecture number 3, and I'm going to call out from just a small passage from my notes, that among the Hebrews, the morality of human decision-making meant waking up and looking at justice and all becoming part of the world grammar, where contemplating God meant participating in creating the future and staying on course. And progress became the idea of moral progress.
That's right.
So that is what he saw as the foundational view of the Hebrews. And he very clearly and very smartly said, faith means you're committed to the discovery of what is going to happen as you discover more and more. Discovery of reciprocal knowledge of the world and yourself, of the world and yourself. And sin is realizing that you're off course and you're deceiving yourself. And prophecy is the act of waking up to the fact that you're off course. All right. So he has very clearly created the original meaning of faith, sin, and prophecy in the Hebrew religion sense, and talks about how it became an open-ended moral progress that we all evolved to in conversation with the gods or God. The reason I bring that up is that this is, I think, the clearest articulation of the framework. And the piece I want to reflect on this is that if you compare it to Hindu tradition of the same era, there is this concept of dharma that showed up 2000 years ago around the same time as the Hebrew. And dharma is pretty much the idea of finding the moral pathway, right? And it is open to interpretation. It is like you can lose your path through dharma and you have to come back to it. So I think what he's saying is that just like Hebrew gods and Hebrew religion started with this idea that you have moral agency and you have to make moral progress. Similarly, in Hindu tradition, the foundational concept is dharma, which literally means the moral path, right? Interpreted.
I completely agree with that, but that's one of the things that sort of gave me this confusion of them not being mutually exclusive, because at the same time that we have this concept of dharma, we also have at the same time there's this concept of cycles of time, right? So
I agree with you. That's why I disagree. I agree that both of those are there, but dharma, unlike the Jewish and other religions, dharma is like there is a cycle to dharma. You could die and make no progress, and that's okay. You will keep coming. The reincarnation will keep happening, and that's different. And whereas the idea of dharma in Buddhism is different. It is all about escaping, following the eightfold noble path to achieve escape from suffering in this world. So the end is different. The mechanisms might be similar, but the end is not open-ended either in dharma or in Buddhism.
Okay, if there's time, we should talk more about this, because I think my understanding is that both are trying to do the same thing, which is to disentangle yourself from the cycle of repeated rebirth. And so in that sense, I see both of them having sort of common goals. But I agree with you that this is in contrast to Judaism or Christianity, where it's you have this one life, you have to do what you can to sort of set yourself up for the afterlife. I don't think that there's as established a concept of rebirth. I think it's much more linear.
I don't think so. Not usually. It may be everlasting life in heaven, but not back here.
Right.
There's another concept that I learned from Miguel Chris, which is the notion that, and I think it's a combination of these two, actually, the two concepts of time being like a double helix that expands and becomes more complex as you grow up. So that's really, when I read that, I was like, God, that's what I've intuited for years. I even have drawings of it myself before I ever read McGilchrist. It's like, I think time is there's cycles, but within an expanding matrix. So it's not the same every time you come around, especially if you're expanding. It's actually more complex, even though it relates to what happened before, the cycle before.
that's a much better articulation of what I was also trying to think through. Yeah.
So I
if you
think I
collapse
agree with you, Bishop, about your pushback on that. I think I would agree that I see it more that way than what Vervaeke seems to be saying. So
Well, let me play the advocate for what Anu was saying then, if I
Sure.
may, which is if you collapse the scale, if I think about what Vervaeke's up to, as I understand it, he's trying to explain a particular part of the process of the evolution of the cognition that all of us are embodying
Yep.
and behaving according to right now. And when you collapse the frame, as in you look at a very small window of time, which is right around this time of Buddha and Jesus. He from that evolutionary explanatory standpoint, I'm basically describing what's going on there. Like, what is the big shift? So I don't see how you get out of ever failing to see that time is cyclical, given the rotation of the Earth on a 24-hour cycle. Like, you're going to deal with it literally every day. So that isn't going to go away. But there's a predominant, I can see if I go to physics and I say, because I think the excess energy is at the base of all evolution. So you've got a species that's evolving, that's got this brain, and as it increases its resources, as if there's more and more excess energy, it's going to do something with it. Nature abhors a vacuum, so what does it do? Well, it elaborates that like you guys were saying, with the power of a given tool, I'm exerting force on the world around me, and that thinking about time in terms of I'm going to get from right now until, if it's dawn, to tonight, and there's a line there, and I can choose various paths through it, and I can use different things along the way. And as that turns out to be powerful in the sense that I become more efficient. I actually start to accrue more resources as a consequence of thinking about time that way. Then I think I can understand the point, like why Vervaeke is making that particular point, why he's calling attention to it. I kind of lost my.
So that's all right.
I want to come back to the title. Like, the whole point of this lecture, in fact, every episode, is to put a marker on where we were at that time on the question of meaning.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. That's
so rather than discuss these ideas in abstract as ideas in isolation, which obviously we could do, but we can go down so many rabbit holes. What he's trying to say is that how we created meaning as a group changed because of this. Because before, it was convenient that you had a cyclical view of the world, very comfortable, and your personal place in it was whatever it was, but you could make peace with the fact that you had gods and you had a place in the cycle, etc. And what he's trying to suggest is that the moment you became an open-ended universe, especially with Hebrew view of the world, that you had a negotiation with the God and the universe, and you had to participate in continuing to discover what is real and what's fake about the world. Suddenly, the meaning comes from that, and not from like cosmological view of the world that was cyclical, etc. I think that's the sharper point he's trying to make, because later on he will say that with scientific revolution we lost the axial progress, and now we are back to the loss of meaning. So I think he's setting up why meaning making was easier in the axial world, right? Until scientific revolution. Why it was easy was that we had a very clear idea of a God, or whatever the equivalent God was, religious view, and our commitment to the process of making meaning to reach the God, whether it's Abrahamic God or a Judeo-Christian version of God or other gods. We had a way to create meaning out of that because we were committed to that loop of discovery. I want to come back to that because that's, I think, the only point of what he's trying to make.
And also that people, once this was embraced, had a moral obligation, actually it had morals, which was the obligation to engage in this way, because it was, and recognizing that you weren't just a victim of the cycles of existence, but you actually could co-create with God towards a better future, and it's your duty to do so. It's your civic duty or your personal duty to be aware, because here's what he's saying: the psychotechnologies allow self-reflection through meditation or prayer or writing or even numbers, because you can kind of suss out where you're bullshitting yourself more easily. And logic is another psychotechnology, right? So and the scientific method is another psychotechnology where you can use it to sort out when you're, as he puts it, the difference between causation and correlation as being one of the major ways that we can sort effectively, right? What I thought was quite well said. I was like, yeah, exactly. Salience versus reality, right? Salience being
Episode 4 is all about Socrates. We should talk about that for the 20 minutes we have. I have a hard stop in 20 minutes.
Yeah,
why.
no worries. Let's do that.
So to me, the Socrates episode number 4 is fantastic.
Oh yeah.
What did you take away? What
Yeah,
do
I had the same. I really, really liked it a lot. So I don't want to hog the time, but someone else wants to pitch in.
Cam, go for it.
What do you think?
Well, actually, there's one more thing I want to say about 3, and I'll talk about 4. So 3 was one critical takeaway from 3 was he says that Christianity made the radical claim that kairos, so the turning points, was embodied in a particular person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So Socrates, let's see, what do I have to say about that? The big takeaway from 4 for me is the technical distinction between a lie and bullshit.
No, that was good. Yes, I agree. That was quite
Yeah.
enlightening, actually, and really salient. I'd say just make salient.
I read the book on bullshit because of this chapter.
What did you think of that book?
A short book. You can read it in 25 minutes. First half
Oh.
of the book is not so interesting. So I actually think it wasn't worth the investment, but the central insight of the book is already captured.
Okay, good.
I'm hurt. I've read it like 3 times.
Oh, you have? Okay, yeah. Well, what about the things that really stood out for me in this episode were how it was Thales, I think I said that right, who was actually fueling the basis to scientific research and thought process. But then there was the rhetoric guys. What are they called again? Sophists, who were good at arguing to win an argument. And I just thought it was absolutely spine-tingling to realize that what Socrates did is he took those two and said, both of these are off base. We need to combine them with a different goal overall, right? Which is truth, right? Is your goal. And so you're arguing to figure out where you're wrong, not to make other people wrong, which I thought was just. And yet the other thing I want to mention is that I noticed how profoundly our modern world has slipped back into pre-axual behavior. I mean, it's because, argument is for winning, not for discovery of wisdom. And that scientific method is for proving yourself right without any concern whatsoever with relevance to what does it matter? If we know, that's a chair, it's made out of wood. Okay, so what? And what's it good for? What does it mean? Well, that doesn't matter, they say in science. Yes, it does. I mean, of course, we have to live our lives, but they deny that. They say, oh, that's just stupid. It's like, yeah, no, it's not. So those were some of the things that really caught me.
Vish?
I love this episode. I think, the contrast to me between the previous episode and this one is I always like episodes where I can take away stuff from it. The previous one gave me a lot of explanations for how things were, but I couldn't get much of, I guess, personal takeaways or personalized takeaways. But there were a couple on here that I really liked. I think one of these is sort of the meaning of know thyself and sort of what it actually is supposed to mean. I think that's something that I've been trying to figure out for a while now, and I couldn't agree more with what is actually supposed to be, which is trying to get a better understanding of how you operate as opposed to just factual things. But more, I think, just the entire idea. Well, actual here's a smaller one that I think I found meaningful, which is his explanation of how oracles operate.
Yeah,
right?
that was
Where
really cool.
the power of metaphor is that you can use it to give somebody a reflection in which they see the things that they perhaps needed to see. So I found that useful. I found a lot of, I was nodding along as he was talking about confirmation bias and sort of, to me, we see that so much in social media these days. So like I was able to make a lot of connections to these echo chambers that we create for ourselves, and sort of knowing that it's an inherent tendency in all of us, I think is useful. Maybe to tie it back to Anu, what you were saying, which is our tools shape us. And so we're definitely moving around with a lot of tools now that are optimized in a way that maybe move us more and more towards confirmation bias instead of away from it.
More towards bullshit.
Yeah, more towards bullshit.
Surrounded by bullshit now, and more towards bullshit. And Gen AI is only going to.
Oh, don't get me started on that. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think social media was bad. With Gen AI, social media comes along, we will be swimming in bullshit where we would not know what reality is. I love the fact that he introduced a term, which I loved, that he called something called aporia, when you don't know what's going on. Right? And he said and Socrates thought his towering strength was he knew when he was under the influence of bullshit.
That's right. That's what made him so wise.
Aporia is a term for when you are under the influence of bullshit.
I have to write that down. That is a really good.
Right. I think we should bring the term back and use it.
Oh yeah, all day long.
Might be like total under the influence of bullshit.
Oh, I wanted to share really quick that Jordan Peterson has 2 programs on his website that actually are exercises in knowing thyself. So one's called the self-authoring program, which is a writing exercise, which I've done. And I'm not quite done. I'm still working on the future authoring, but I've done all the rest. And there's also the knowing personality, which is personality psychology, and you do a self-report, excuse me. And then it tells you what your what does he call it? Your temperaments are.
Yeah.
And I found it to be fantastically accurate. It gave me a lot of insight about some of my struggles. So
I hadn't heard of the second one. I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, that really helped me.
Yeah, but I think the first one is the same as the course that he teaches in college or taught in college.
One course is just it's teaching, but you actually can take a self-report. No, I can't remember what it's called. Let me look on his website real quick. Peterson. I don't want to take up too much time, but let's see. Jordan Peterson.
This is in service to knowing thyself. Is that the connection here?
Yeah, that's the point I'm bringing it up, because I was kind of astonished the more okay, let's see, personality course. I took that and it's excellent. Selfauthoring.com. That's the writing exercise. Understandingyourself.com. Understandingmyself.com. That's where you do the self-report, and it tells you what your temperament dynamic is in the 5-figure model.
Got it.
So, okay, I just want to share that because I think it's extremely relevant to what we're talking about. I found it very helpful. I took all those and I found them immensely useful for me to be a better person, a more forgiving person, and hopefully less prone to my own bullshit. Hopefully.
Thank you. I'm writing that down.
So, other observations from this course?
Let's see.
From this, the session episode?
Well, how about this? The synthesis of reason and love. That's, of course, which has been lost in our modern world largely. Because I think that's something that when they talk about cosmos, for example, I didn't have any idea that's what it meant. but it's something that I intuitively believed from a young age, even though I didn't have a lot of support for it, that truth and beauty are the same thing. And I still strongly embrace that idea that truth cannot but be beautiful. So therefore, that's why art that's beautiful, or even a machine that's made to be very helpful, has a beauty to it as a result of its function being correct. That's something that I have intuitively believed for years. And now that I'm reading things like McGilchrist and Peterson and this, I'm like, yeah, okay, that's interesting that I had that intuition before I was even told that it was right. Since I was a little kid and a teenager.
Yeah.
So that's pretty salient for me to look at that and go, wow, yeah, that's cool.
Just picking up on a comment you make about love and reason, it's funny because in the modern times, especially in the last 200 years or so, especially post-Enlightenment, love as an attribute has gone away from all discourse. So it's now relegated to either the religious groups and like a very small thing. But love has been foundation of virtually every philosophy, every religion, every major transformational practice, and so forth and so forth. It's funny how little the discourse is around love now.
Well, Socrates, he says that Socrates actually talked about that concept, but love not being erotic, but to be, I think it's more in the, if I'm correct, correct me if I'm wrong, it's more of a desire for the best possible things to happen to everything. It's, not just people, but all of existence.
What you care about.
Yes.
Love is what you care about, what to care about.
To care about.
Right, which is interesting.
So that seems to me very in line with how you would be a good, because he says it's about, science leaves out how to be a good person. It doesn't tell you how to do that. Yeah. Even though Sam Harris says that's not true, but I've read his books and I've listened to him long enough that I'm like, Sam, you just need to really admit that you're wrong, because it's obvious if you looked at the world that you're wrong. If people that are really onto the scientific view are rude, unsympathetic, unempathetic, and all they care about is winning an argument. So whatever.
Yeah,
I don't agree.
Yeah. And other point I want to make is that Socrates did a smart, like, not only does he talk about that, but he talks about reconciling truth and relevance. But then he also talks about transformation. And the next episode, we will talk about Plato and Cave, but he talks about transformation as kind of the foundational mechanism of getting out of the frame you're in. And I don't think anybody before that talks about it, or people like Sam Harris don't talk about it.
Maybe he does, but I've never heard it that way. Peterson talks about it, I think, maybe in a different angle. But he does talk about, a lot of the same concepts. I'm actually kind of curious, because what Vervaeke's going over is actually background to much of what Peterson talks about in his books and his lectures. So now I'm getting this base and like, oh God, I wish I would have learned this when I was in high school and college, because it's so relevant. And we didn't learn it because it was already out of favor by that, or I didn't. I don't know about you guys, Andrew, but where I went to school, they never talked about this.
Have any of you guys read The Immortality Key?
Who's the author?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I'll look that up.
Have you guys used psychedelics?
Only in microdoses. I've never done a full trip, but I've done 4 micro doses of psilocybin over the last 7 years or something like that.
I'm looking into it and trying to figure out a safe pathway for it in next year or so.
I just started. I did my very first and only dose like a couple months ago, 2 months ago, but it wasn't enough to go to what Vervaeke calls a transformative experience.
Yeah.
Right? It was just enough to test the waters. So that is upcoming.
Yeah, I'm investigating.
I mean, I've used, I do tinctures of THC and CBD as part of my recovery from PTSD, and I have found that combination to be immensely supportive in my recovery. I mean, I never thought I'd ever take these things. I was totally against it before I thought of it. But I read the book by How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, and it did change my mind. And I was shocked and horrified by the lies that have been perpetuated. So, and he says there's, the danger is almost zero. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be stupid about this, but I'm going to try to use this to my benefit. And it really helps. So it's helped me even access certain feelings and processes that I could not reach otherwise. That's my experience. And I even had a major purge, as I call it, of emotion that came out. It was a combination of things. And that's the thing that I could also tell you, I am so clear that the psychedelic is not actually the main reason why you shift. It just facilitates it more easily. Other things have to be in place. That's what I've noticed, because I'll take THC and CBD combos and I'll feel completely different depending on my state and my circumstances and my sort of, if I'm in flow or not, and all this stuff. It's a trip. So I can tell the drug does not predict how I'll be. It's just a facilitator of whatever state I tend to be trending towards. And sometimes it can help me get out of things, but I am real clear that it's not on its own. It's not a magic bullet. That's for sure. And the psychedelics I've taken triggered certain visions and dreams that were profoundly spiritual and very unexpected, given my background. So, yeah,
the reason that I ask has to do with the circumstance in which Socrates was living, and even more specifically Pythagoras.
Yeah, right. He was experimenting, right?
He talked about how Socrates was largely informed by Pythagoras. Anyway, so I guess I just wanted to bring a little bit of attention to it in this session, because I think it's actually, I don't think Vervaeke goes into it in any detail in this entire lecture series. And I think it's actually a really, if you want to understand what was going on there, I think that's a really important thing to understand.
I agree. I mean, I've enough people have talked about psychedelics recently in intelligent ways for me to consider that they're, potentially a very key element in human evolution for throughout time. Even how our brains developed, they say probably was influenced by the use of psychedelics over thousands of years.
Well, Vervaeke doesn't talk about that. I think he actually says that.
In Hindu literature, there is a whole reference to soma, which are psychedelics, and other kind of drugs, which are mushrooms, probably psilocybin. Who knows what the original was, but both in shamanism as well. So I think psychedelics as a tool for transformative experiences is recorded in history in virtually every civilization, I think, including Mayans and others and Aztecs and all.
Yeah, that's my understanding too, is that all humans had it.
Bring up process check. We have about 4 minutes left. Anything else? I want to just schedule some future times and so forth. And
oh, right. No, I think if you have a hard stop, we should go ahead and schedule. I think, don't you guys think?
I agree.
Okay. Yeah, let's.
I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.